It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. President Putin's most determined domestic critic dead in his Siberian jail. The anger of the democratic world at the death of Alexei Navalny.
Make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible.
The ovation for the widow who watched her husband return to captivity and eventual death after she tells the world it must unite and defeat this evil. But President Putin's spokesman accuses the West of a rabid response as police target those protesting inside Russia tonight for arrest. Also on Sky News at 10, Donald Trump barred from business in the city where he made his name and ordered to pay $350 million in penalties. Labour's election double whammy to Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives as the party wins 2 by-elections in deep blue seats. The prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann appears in court, charged with 2 rapes and 3 counts of sexual abuse. Prince Harry says he's grateful for being able to spend time last week with the King, as he reveals he's considered US citizenship. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. Alexei Navalny died after falling unwell following a walk at his Siberian penal colony. That, at least, is what Russia's Federal Penitentiary Service said today. But few outside the country appear to be buying it. President Biden told the world to make no mistake, President Putin is responsible for the death of his most dogged domestic opponent. And tonight, the Russian police are on the streets of Moscow and other cities and have arrested some of those protesting for laying flowers. We'll look back at Alexei Navalny's life of protest in a moment. But first, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports.
This was Alexei Navalny only yesterday, not a man visibly on death's door. Laughing and joking with a federal judge in a court hearing. But 24 hours later, Russian state TV was announcing his unexpected demise. After a walk in jail, it said, Navalny had felt unwell and lost consciousness. Doctors tried to resuscitate the activist, say authorities, but failed. Alexei Navalny leaves a wife, Yulia, and 2 children. Yulia was with world leaders at the Munich Security Conference as the news came through, but somehow still found the courage to address them.
You've probably all already seen the terrible news today. I thought for a long time whether I should come out here or fly straight to my children. But then I thought, what would Alexei do in my place? And I'm sure he would be here. He would be on this stage.
Alexei Navalny was known worldwide for his astonishing courage, standing up to Russia's corrupt regime that first poisoned him, then put him in jail, and now it seems has killed him. His death has brought swift condemnation.
He was so many things that Putin was not. He was brave, he was principled, he was dedicated to building a Russia where the rule of law existed and where it applied to everybody. Navalny believed in that Russia. He knew it was a cause worth fighting for, and obviously even dying for.
Alexei Navalny's multiple sentences on trumped-up charges prompted calls in the West for sanctions on Putin. They were repeated today.
Well, there should be consequences because there's no doubt in my mind this man was a brave fighter against corruption, for justice, for democracy, and look what Putin's Russia did to him. They trumped up charges, they imprisoned him, they poisoned him, they sent him to an Arctic penal colony, and he's died. And that is because of the action that Putin's Russia took. No one can look at this regime now and not recognize it for the truly dreadful nature that it has.
Alexei Navalny was a potent critic of Putin's war in Ukraine. Its president, Vladimir Zelensky, also in Germany, blamed the Russian president for his death.
To me, it's obvious he was killed, like the thousands of others who were tortured to death because of this person. Putin doesn't care who dies as long as he maintains his own position.
The Russian leader himself was smiling his way through a photo opportunity with students and engineers. There was no mention of his arch-rival's death. That was left instead to other officials who were making it all sound like just another routine death in jail.
As far as we know, with all the current rules, the Federal Penitentiary Service is engaged in all checks and clarifications. No specific instructions are required because there is a certain set of rules that the service is guided by.
Ordinary Muscovites were paying their respects with flowers in the snow. While most Russians have gone along quietly with their country's slide into totalitarian rule, Alexei Navalny always fought against it, and now it seems has paid the price. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
If they choose to kill me, it means we are incredibly strong. Those words were spoken by Alexei Navalny before he voluntarily returned to Russia, incarceration and his eventual death. He had already survived poisoning and multiple arrests by then, as our Moscow correspondent Diana Magne reports.
Alexei Navalny lived and died fighting Vladimir Putin's regime and the corruption at its heart. Banned in 2018 from running in elections, he remained Putin's most powerful political opponent, the one man capable of bringing tens of thousands to the streets, the man Putin famously refused to mention by name.
Navalny is an idea that Russia could be rich, successful, and a well-developing country, a country where we would want to live.
He was stubborn, sarcastic, and charismatic. His YouTube investigations into Putin and his cronies garnering millions of views and exposing graft of the highest order. But it was in August 2020 that Alexei Navalny became a global name when he was poisoned on board a flight from Siberia. The poison was Novichok, a weapons-grade nerve agent that Russia had used 2 years earlier against the former KGB spy Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. Navalny fell into a coma, and for 3 days his wife Yulia fought for him to be airlifted to Berlin, while doctors in Russia dithered over the diagnosis. Under German care and with his family beside him, Navalny slowly recovered. He blamed Vladimir Putin directly for his poisoning and managed to get one of the Russian security agents involved to admit that he'd placed the poison in Navalny's underpants.
Well, we focused on the inner seams. At least those were the parts we treated.
Western countries imposed sanctions for what they said was another Russian breach of the Chemical Weapons Convention. But President Putin laughed it off.
It doesn't mean he should be poisoned. Who needs him anyway? If someone wanted to, they would have probably finished it.
Once he'd recovered, Navalny stunned the world by announcing that he was returning to Russia.
I realized I'm nearly healthy, and the rest I can cure at home.
Many questioned why, but his life's work was in Russia. For him, there was no other choice. He was immediately arrested and imprisoned. The years inside extending into decades as fresh charges were levelled against him, all of which he said were politically motivated. Tens of thousands took to the streets on his return, the largest unsanctioned protests in Putin's Russia. But the crackdown was brutal, and once Putin invaded Ukraine, which Navalny strongly opposed, demonstrations of any kind were effectively crushed. In a remote prison colony north of the Arctic Circle, Navalny's health deteriorated. He knew what would likely come, and he'd forewarned his supporters and encouraged them to keep up his fight.
Если это произошло, это означает, что мы необыкновенно сильны в этот момент, раз они решили меня убить. Ну и нужно использовать эту силу, не сдаваться, помнить о том, что мы огромная сила, которая находится под гнетом вот этих вот чуваков плохих, лишь потому что мы не можем осознать, насколько действительно мы сильны. Все, что нужно для торжества зла, это бездействие добрых людей. Поэтому бездействовать не надо.
Diana Magny, Sky News.
Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes is in Munich tonight. And Deborah, we heard Alexei Navalny's widow speaking there earlier, and so much anger from politicians from Europe and the United States. We've heard Lord Cameron saying earlier that there should be consequences. But the question is, what can and will they do?
Well, Yulia, Alexei Navalny's wife, actually just left from the conference behind me about half an hour ago. She didn't want to speak out here, but her words to delegates inside electrified this place. She received a standing ovation, and the death of Alexei Navalny has absolutely dominated and will continue to dominate the conversations here. You ask what can be done. It seems there's very little that can be done inside Russia in terms of responding in any kind of more painful way beyond sanctions. But a diplomat has said to me this evening that the EU is re-looking at the kind of sanctions package that they have for Russia. The British government has issued a statement saying that they have summoned the Russian ambassador to the UK to tell him that the UK holds Russia fully responsible for Alexei Navalny's death. We've not heard yet what the US might do. But one other thing that Western allies are being urged to do even more urgently now is, while yes, they can't directly attack Russia internally, they can support Ukraine's war against Russia inside Ukraine. In particular, that means the US Congress finally passing this significant funding bill, which they're under pressure to do, and which the Ukrainian president will surely talk about when he comes here to Munich tomorrow.
Deborah, thank you. Donald Trump has always claimed to be a very rich man, and that claim will be tested after he was ordered to pay more than $350 million in penalties for fraudulently claiming to be worth more than he is. The former US president has also been banned from running a business in New York, the city and state where he made his name. Our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
The Trump cavalcade to court is by now a familiar sight. It is an expensive journey.
Consider this an unconstitutional witch hunt. It's election interference at the highest level. It's a disgrace. It's in coordination with the White House and Joe Biden because you can't win a campaign fairly.
Trump might have had strong words for this civil fraud trial. It had a hefty penalty for him. A fine of $355 million and a ban on doing business in New York for 3 years. The judge gave his sons Donald Jr. and Eric Trump each a 2-year ban. Their fraud was to inflate the value of company assets to receive more favourable terms on loans and insurance. Trump Tower, where he famously descended the stairs to declare his presidential run, was one building involved. Donald Trump said its apartment was 33,000 square feet. In fact, it was a third of the size.
I'm not sure $355 million is ever a win per se, but it certainly isn't as big of a loss as it could have been. This could have been a devastating blow to the Trump organization that might have even forced a liquidation of their assets in New York and possibly even in Florida. That's not going to happen now.
It is a hefty hit to the Trump finances and to Donald Trump, the brand. In a statement, his lawyer said, "This verdict is a manifest injustice, plain and simple. It's the culmination of a multi-year politically fueled witch hunt that was designed to take down Donald Trump." The former president made his money and reputation in New York real estate. It propelled him to celebrity billionaire status. For the self-styled king of New York, in a Manhattan courtroom, the crown has slipped.
Let's speak to James now. And James has always claimed he's a billionaire, but now he'll have to forfeit a significant part of his fortune and prove it.
Yeah, that's right, Gillian. It's a heavy hit and humiliation for Donald Trump. There is this ban of 3 years on doing business in the city where he made his name and he made his millions, but also there is the sum of $355 million. Add to that $90 million that he was recently ordered to pay to the writer E. Jean Carroll for defamation and sexual abuse. So he has to find ready cash. His humiliation complete by the fact the Trump organization has been assigned a monitor to look over that organization's financial dealings. I think what this civil fraud trial trial exposed, Gillian, was a disregard for rules, regulations and the law where business is concerned. That disregard continues to this day. Judge Arthur Engeron talking about how there was a complete lack of contrition on the part of Trump and others involved in the scheme. He's not happy. On Truth Social, his media site, he's talking about a crooked New York State judge working with a totally corrupt Attorney General. Great company, he says, election interference, witch hunt, brackets, more to follow, no doubt.
No doubt. James, thank you. Rishi Sunak insisted today the government's plan is working. It's unlikely, though, that that plan involved losing one of the safest Conservative seats in the country. That loss in the Wellingborough by-election came alongside another loss in Kingswood. Labour's Jen Kitchen won in Wellingborough, not by little, but by 6,436 votes. The Conservative vote there fell by 37.6%, a post-war record, partly because of the performance of Reform, who won 13% of the vote. In Kingswood, Labour's Damien Egan won a majority of 2,501 votes. The Conservative vote there fell by 21%. The swing in votes to Labour, if replicated across the country, would be enough to deliver the party a majority in Parliament with some ease. Our political correspondent Rob Powell reports from Wellingborough.
From the West Country to the Midlands, Labour jubilation as the party chalks up two big by-election wins.
Last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go. And as every football fan knows, you don't win the league by a good result in February.
11,100. Labour's victory started in the early hours with Damien Egan taking Kingswood, a seat that's soon to be abolished, his Tory predecessor having resigned over the government's climate policies. Wellingborough followed a couple of hours later, a thumping swing to Labour, putting Jen Kitchen into Parliament. The former Tory MP here, Peter Bone, was ejected following bullying and sexual misconduct claims. His partner, a local councillor, was the candidate in this vote.
The circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do.
But as Labour celebrate in Wellingborough, there's disillusionment from voters.
I did vote for her, yes, and the wife did.
And have you always voted Labour in the past?
No, I usually vote Tory.
The Labour coming in, I'm afraid that if we don't change course, I'm talking as a Conservative voter, we might lose the next general elections.
But the way the country is at the moment, I think any change would be an improvement. That's all really I can say.
The Tories put little effort into these two campaigns, and after a bad start to the week for Labour, fighting familiar claims of anti-Semitism, it's now a near-perfect end.
These results would be a disaster at any time, but the fact we're now months away from a general election makes them close to catastrophic for the Conservatives. And it's not just the big swings to Labour that will worry Tory MPs, because they're also facing a political challenge from the opposite side, from the right-wing Reform Party.
The party took sizable slices of both votes. Wellingborough's candidate clear they won't stand aside for the Tories.
Isn't the reality that if someone voted for Reform at a general election, you're making a Keir Starmer government more likely?
The Conservative Party and the Labour Party are two sides of the same coin. There is no party in this country making the case for reduced taxation, reduced regulation, less immigration. There's no party doing it.
Labour reaffirmed, the Tories licking their wounds. Calls to change course have inevitably followed, but time is running out to change this trend. Rob Powell, Sky News in Wellingborough.
Well, the Conservatives' loss in Wellingborough was caused by the biggest by-election swing away from the party since 1994. Then, of course, the government would soon be swept away by Tony Blair's landslide. So what could the results mean? Here's our political correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan.
Labour have now wrestled 6 seats from the Tories since 2022. But how significant are these results less than a year out from a general election? Let's just put this in a bit of context. Labour overturned a massive 18,000 Conservative majority in Wellingborough and more than 11,000 in Kingswood. That's a swing of 28.5 and 16.4 percentage points. These are some of the largest Conservative to Labour swings we've seen in the post-war era. Wellingborough was the largest since 1994. That's when Labour took Dudley West, which foreshadowed Tony Blair's landslide victory 3 years later. So could this be a sign of things to come? Well, Labour currently needs a 12.7 percentage point swing to secure a victory at the general election. That would already be the largest such swing since 1945. And by-elections, they're by no means accurate predictors of election results, but if the Kingswood result, that's a 16.4 percentage point swing, were to be replicated nationally, well, that would give Labour a huge majority of 110 seats. A Wellingborough-style swing would break our swingometer. It would be completely unheard of. But in theory, if it were replicated everywhere, the Tories would be left with just 8 seats. So there's no doubt that the Conservative to Labour swing is gaining momentum, but who's really driving it? Well, the Conservative vote, it's collapsing. Look at the Tory vote share in Wellingborough at the top there. It's the biggest drop at a by-election since 1945. But this isn't a simple case of Tory voters defecting to Labour. A breakdown of the vote share shows that the Reform Party here in the light blue has been doing much of the heavy lifting, helping to deliver those Labour victories. So this is a battle that the Tories are fighting on multiple fronts. These are by-elections, and of course things play out differently in general elections, but it does give us a sense of the shifting mood among the electorate, and the signals are pointing to an even bigger swing for Labour than the one achieved under Tony Blair in 1997.
A teenage boy who died after being stabbed in Bristol on Wednesday has been named by police. 16-year-old Darian Williams was attacked in a park by 2 people wearing masks who fled on bicycles. Avon and Somerset police have arrested 2 15-year-old boys on suspicion of murder. 2 people have been arrested after 6 migrants were found in the back of a refrigerated lorry at Newhaven Ferry Port in East Sussex. The discovery prompted a large emergency services response, with 6 people taken to hospital. Police say 1 man was detained on suspicion of people smuggling and the other was suspected of entering the UK illegally. 6-time Olympic champion Sir Chris Hoy has announced he's been diagnosed with cancer. The former track cyclist shared the news on his Instagram account, saying that he'd hoped to keep the diagnosis private, but that his hand has been forced. He added that he started chemotherapy and feels fine. The court appearance was only brief, but the world got a sight of the main suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann today. Christian B was in front of judges on unrelated charges of rape and sexual abuse carried out in Portugal over a 17-year period. Madeleine disappeared in the Algarve in 2007. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt reports from northern Germany, warning his report contains flashing images.
He may be Germany's most notorious prisoner, but there were no bells or blue lights to herald his arrival. A bit tense, perhaps, Christian B wandered into court, his hands cuffed in front of him. Serious faces on his defence team. Christian B is charged with 3 rapes and 2 sex assaults on children. But the judges didn't get to hear anything of the case. The defence wanted one of them dismissed. And here's why. A series of tweets she once allegedly posted calling for the death of Brazil's ex-president Jair Bolsonaro. Kill the devil, read one. He must be killed now, read another.
This lay judge should not be part of a court case. If you publicly call for a crime being committed, you are breaking the law and distancing yourself from the rule of law.
The hearing had barely lasted an hour. It was adjourned for a week. The lay judge may be replaced when it restarts. The sex crimes Christian B faces stem from Portugal, where he lived for many years. Among them, the rape of an Irish holiday rep and 2 other unknown victims. On a beach, flashing at a young girl. In a playground, a similar exposure. But it's over the mystery of Madeleine McCann he's most notorious. He's the main suspect in her disappearance in Portugal 17 years ago. Christian B hasn't been charged with Madeleine's abduction. He denies it and the crimes he's on trial for now. On day 1 of the trial, a small victory, perhaps, for Christian B's defence team. It may not be their last. His lawyer urged everybody to come back next week. It won't, he said, be any less exciting. Martin Brunt, Sky News in Braunschweig.
Finally, Prince Harry already has his home in America, and in an interview with US TV today, he revealed he's considered taking American nationality. He also said he was grateful to be able to see the King last week after his cancer diagnosis. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock reports.
From the snowy slopes of Whistler, a hint frosty family relations are thawing. The Sussexes are here for Invictus, and with them an American TV crew. The ABC's Good Morning America show filming Harry's first interview since his father's cancer diagnosis.
I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
I've also found in my own life that sort of an illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family.
Absolutely.
Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together. I think any illness, any sickness brings families together.
Harry's tone less combative and more conciliatory. And while he said plenty in the past, he stayed quiet about the King. But when asked about life in the US, this was interesting.
How are you enjoying your time living in the US?
It's amazing. I love every single day.
Do you feel American?
Do I feel American? No, I don't know. I don't know how I feel.
Would you think about becoming a citizen?
I have considered it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What would stop you from doing it?
I have no idea. I'm here standing next to this with these guys. The American citizenship is a thought that has crossed my mind, but certainly not something that's a high priority for me right now.
It is a big decision. Taking US citizenship means renouncing his royal title. For now, the focus is here. After Harry's quick trip to the UK, it's been a week of announcements, from a rebranded website to Meghan's return to podcasting, as the Sussexes try to positively promote their work and public image. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the Daily Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this story on the front of The Telegraph. Its headline, Putin must pay for Navalny murder. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. very definitive. Welcome back. This is at Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. First look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. You heard one of our reviewers there in the background. Let's take a look at the top stories first for you. Alexei Navalny, the man considered President Putin's most powerful political opponent, has died in a Russian prison. Many world leaders are blaming the Kremlin for his death. Donald Trump has been ordered to pay more than $350 million in penalties and banned from running a business in New York for fraudulently claiming to be worth more than he is. Rishi Sunak has been called upon to change direction after 2 crushing defeats for the Conservatives in by-elections in Kingswood and Wellingborough. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the Daily Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Telegraph reports on world leaders insisting that Vladimir Putin must pay for the murder of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The Financial Times points out that Mr Navalny died suddenly in an Arctic prison. The Mail sums up the words of his widow: "Putin will pay for what he did to my husband." It's a virtually identical headline for The Express. And The Eye has the simple headline, "Murdered by the Kremlin," in inverted commas. Turning to other news, The Mirror has word of Prince Harry's interview on American TV, in which he suggested the King's cancer diagnosis could lead to a reconciliation for his family. The Times describes Harry as seeking a royal return to heal the rift with his father. And on a lighter note, The Star carries allegations that a darts player has been doing something very rude and smelly to put opponents off their game. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Henry Hill and Susie Boniface. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the story that's on every front page, and this is the death of Alexei Navalny in that Arctic prison. Susie, take us through what we know, or at least what we're being told.
Well, in December, Navalny seemed to disappear. He was having regular meetings with his lawyers in prisons that he was in, and then he just sort of disappeared off the radar for a bit. And it was expected that he had probably been shifted to a different penal colony. It's one of the things that Putin does with his opponents. He likes to move them around and keep people on their toes and not tell them where they are. And so there was a few weeks, and then he popped up in this colony beyond the Arctic Circle there, and that's one of the final pictures taken of him that was on a video link as he was at a court hearing, dialing in from there, I think the day before he died, actually. So he surfaced there. His lawyers said, well, now we know where he is, at least we can talk to him again and make sure he's safe and he's all right and he's healthy. And then the first reports are suggesting that he went for some exercise in the prison exercise yard, felt unwell, in quote marks, when he came back, because he'd had something done to him out there, fell unconscious, and now it's the Russian prison service has declared that he died. Now, it hasn't been confirmed and verified. His lawyers are on the way to the prison to see if they can gain access to the body and identify it and so on. But it does seem like he has been killed either as a result of his many years of mistreatment at the hands of the Russian regime. He had Novichok put in his underpants 4 years ago. It takes a lot. That's going to take a knock on your lifespan. Or that something has happened to him while he's in that penal colony, something worse. And that's one of the things, obviously, his lawyers are going to be looking at, if they can get access to his body, is any marks or wounds or injuries or anything that are on there. But we're in this strange situation now. I think Garry Kasparov, the Russian chess player, put on Twitter, that Putin tried to kill Navalny quickly and in public and secretly many years ago with the Novichok attack. And when that failed, he murdered him publicly and slowly over a period of time. And that's what's happened. We'll go on to talk about it, but there are condemnation from around the world. Everyone has seen what's been happening to this guy. He's been getting, you can see from the pictures here, he was fairly well and healthy even after the Novichok attack. And then the latest pictures in prison, he's increasingly gaunt, increasingly looking unwell. And now he's died. And everyone's seen what's happened. Everyone's condemning it. Everyone knows what's gone on. Nothing is going to change as a result. Absolutely nothing.
And Henry, meanwhile, we saw today Vladimir Putin carrying out a news conference or interview that he was doing. No mention of him. He's actually refused in the past to even mention him by name. And the Russians saying that there will be an investigation into his death.
Yeah. And, you know, this is the Russian state, so I'm sure they'll do a thorough and impartial job and publicise their findings to the world. I mean, it's always been slightly surprising that Navalny went back to Russia after the poisoning, because he was in Berlin. He was as safe as you can be, given that the Kremlin does deploy assassins all over the world. And he decided to return. And I think that when he made that decision, he must have known that something like this was certainly a possibility. It's strange, the timing, because as Susie said, he's been in prison for years, and he's not going anywhere. He's in the appropriately dystopianly named, I think, correctional colony number 3. And yet, if he has been killed, it's a big question. Like, why has Putin decided at a time when he's already under international pressure, when there is already a huge sanctions effort against Russia over Ukraine, to kill Navalny now, if that's what he's done? It's a very strange decision.
But we know that he doesn't care what the West thinks.
He doesn't care, no. We do know, I mean, shouldn't even be worth saying, but we know that Vladimir Putin is a mobster. He's a thief. He's a murderer. He has been welcomed at the top table of world politics. Our current Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, greeted him on a state visit in 2013, albeit before the Salisbury attack and so on. And, you know, lots of people were talking about new deals and you know, letting Russian money come through London and all the rest of it.
But interestingly, tonight, Lord Cameron saying that something should be done.
Yeah. I wonder who could have done something a bit sooner.
But just even on mobster logic, like, I'm not saying that Putin's a good guy or anything, but just even on his own dictatorial logic, like, what signal is this sending and to whom?
Yeah.
Because no one was talking about Navalny. You know, there's so many things that Russia's been doing wrong. No one's been talking about Navalny for a while, really. And all of a sudden, he's on every front page.
Doesn't that make us think, perhaps, that this is not natural causes, but that he's died without Putin's direct intervention? He's died as a result of the treatment that's just had too much of an impact on him, perhaps, over those years. Well, we don't know yet.
Yeah, I do think that is. I do think that is.
And that's perhaps why the timing seems to be a bit off. But I think there are there is possible talk about re-elections and so on in Russia. It may well be that Putin, who is, you know, he's not as strong as he was. He's had a failed coup that was led against him. He is leading a country that is the most sanctioned in the world. He is shunned by everybody. He is not winning, but also not losing in Ukraine. He's absolutely stuck and bogged down there. His best hope is that the rest of the world stops helping Ukraine. And he appears to have some kind of illness of his own, Parkinson's or something like that. And so perhaps he just thought he doesn't want Navalny there as this threat anymore, and he does just want to rub him out. And it's a sign of weakness if that's the case. That's what Navalny predicted many years ago when he went back. He said, well, if they kill me, it's because we're stronger.
The Mail focusing on the words of Navalny's widow, Yulia, who spoke at the Munich Security Forum today, very bravely, through tears, and basically saying that Putin will pay for what he's done to her husband.
Yeah, but how? I mean, this is the thing about Russia, is that within, maybe the regime is fragile, but change can only come from within Russia. And Russia is, compared to Western experience, a very alien country in very many ways. And there's been no sign to date of the kind of mass popular resistance that you, for example, saw in Ukraine, when the pro-Kremlin regime in Ukraine was ousted. And the other thing about Russia, and obviously this sacrifice is very tragic, but I think sometimes we just think, the Russian leader of the Russian opposition, and therefore we assume Western values and so on and so forth. But this man was an ultranationalist. If you actually look at his politics and you look at the footage of the demonstrations that he was leading, where they're all waving Tsarist flags. So even the kind of change that Navalny represented was not the sort of shift towards a country that we might have hoped for in the 90s, where Russia was becoming a quote-unquote ordinary member of the global community. It was still a very, very right-wing ethno-nationalist government that this man was touting when he was leader of the opposition. So it's hard to be optimistic about Russia. I really hope things change, not least for the sake of ordinary Russians as well as Ukrainians. But the odds of change coming from within the system at the moment seem very slim.
Yeah. I mean, this was their opposition leader, as best that they had. And he was capable, I think we heard on Sky earlier on, of bringing thousands of people onto the streets. It's not enough. Thousands isn't going to get you anywhere in Russia. You need millions of people on the streets or nothing's going to change. We've had 100 arrests, protests in 8 different cities. That's what, 10, 12 in a city arrested? That's not a big worry for Putin. We've got already massive sanctions all over them. We've got already all these condemnations. They don't do anything. We already know that everyone who upsets Putin falls out of a window, or their plane gets blown up, or they get Novichok dropped in their underpants or on their door handle. He's done it in countries around the world. He's acted with impunity. He's never been punished. And the reason for that is, as Henry just pointed out, there's no one really to replace him. You know, cut the head off this particular snake, then the mobsters underneath him just start fighting amongst themselves, and it gets even worse. So he is at least, you know, he is the plug on a very horrible swamp, which he made himself, and that there is no better option. And so we are stuck with in a world where billions of people are led by a mobster, and he's allowed to carry on murdering people in public.
On the point of international support and help that Eula's calling for and called for today in her speech, and with Lord Cameron saying that something should be done, what do you think the likelihood is that there will be some form of I don't know, sanction or protest against what has happened? What can the international community do?
Well, the interesting thing is, like, what's left? Because we've already, the Western world has already subjected Russia to unprecedented levels of sanctions. You know, we've seized Russian central bank assets. Now, during World War II, we did not do that to Nazi Germany. That is a complete break with the entire international sanctions regime that has ever existed before. Every single senior member of the Russian regime is under travel sanctions and personal sanctions. They're all hiding their assets in Dubai and other places already. So it is, I think, a really difficult question of what we're already hitting this regime with basically every economic instrument we have. What else can we possibly do? I don't know.
Well, there are 2 other things that could happen. So the first is, I think we've already heard on Sky that experts have been saying, well, look, this is why Biden has to let $60 billion worth of armaments and help go to Ukraine, because if you don't defeat him in Ukraine, he's going to roll through Europe, and you have to. That's what the world can do. That's what stops him. That's what will depose Putin. That's what will end his regime fairer than anything else if he loses that war, and actually loses it very decisively. So you've got to do that. You've got to fund Zelensky in the war in Ukraine. The other thing is that there are multiple court cases going on around the world with all those frozen assets, and trying to get reparations for Ukraine. And there are legal firms, human rights legal firms, who are battling to get those courts and get those motions filed and to seize those assets. Now, why don't we have the G7 governments who are hosting, or who have allies who are hosting those assets that have been frozen, just say, right, we're going to have them, we're going to use that money, and that's going to
central bank assets, or do you mean like privately held assets?
Privately held assets. There's the people that have been sanctioned under the regimes. Yeah. And so, you know, there's a good legal reason to seize those, to get those jurisdictions actually. At the moment, it's all stuck. It's all stuck in legal blah, blah. And if they could find a way to get those assets and actually start confiscating them, taking the assets. How would you bring down Al Capone? Well, you found his tax fraud, right? So you've got to start taking his wealth away. You've got to start taking his base away and taking the support away from within the mob, and then he crumbles. But what do we get when he crumbles? Just more hell.
Susie and Henry, for the moment, thank you. We're going to take a break, but coming up, the former US President Donald Trump is expected to respond to being handed a $350 million fine. Stay with us.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made.
We beg you to let Madeleine come home.
My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
I've seen people who believe and strive for the American dream, even in the face of disaster.
Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute.
Okay. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Henry Hill and Susie Boniface. Before we have a look at the papers, I'm going to take you to Mar-a-Lago, live shot there, where Donald Trump is expected to respond to tonight's court ruling. That is the former president's home. We're expecting him to make a statement following that fine of $350 million issued to him today, and the barring of him operating a business for 3 years in the city and state of New York. So we'll keep an eye on that, and as soon as he makes an appearance, we'll pop back to West Palm Beach, Florida. In the meantime, let's continue with our newspaper review in the presence of Susie and Henry. We're going to look at Donald Trump. This is the Times World, and they give us the detail about the New York judge that has given this colossal fine of $350 million. Susie?
Yes, he hasn't got it. He doesn't have that kind of cash lying around. And as the case proves, so what this case was about tax fraud fundamentally. And it was about the fact that Trump, whose money and wealth is built on a property empire, had been overvaluing that empire in order to get loans, but was saying that it was worth so much less in order to pay his taxes. And you can't have an apartment that is simultaneously worth $100 million while claiming it's only worth $10 million for the tax man. It just doesn't work that way. If you want to get your mortgage, you want to pay your taxes, the money has to marry up. And so they found out, for example, one of his New York apartments in Trump Tower, I think he had claimed, for purposes of a loan agreement, it was 30,000 square feet, when it was actually a third of that size. It was a mere 10,000 square feet. Now, Trump and his children were all on the indictment originally. They claimed not to have any awareness of it, and then it was all done by the accountants, so I don't know kind of thing. But the judge sort of decided really that this was fairly egregious. It's a discrepancy of this order of magnitude by a real estate developer sizing up his own living space of decades can only be considered fraud, he said. There's no way that anyone could possibly think that any of this stuff was true, and then sign the documents and all the rest of it. Now, Trump was thrown out of the case a few times, was misbehaving, was criticising the judge's staff and so on and so forth, got fined for that. He was always going to be found guilty of this. He was always going to be fined. The issue was always how much and how big that fine was going to be. And the size of the fine, by comparison with other cases like it, is really big. And what's really punishing as well is that order that he cannot conduct business in the city and state of New York anymore.
Well, for 3 years.
For 3 years. So it raises a possibility he would have to sell Trump Tower like for $1.50 to one of his sons or something if they've got the pocket money, and then sort of rent it back off Donald Jr. or something else if he wants to stay living in Trump Tower. It's bizarre and it's strange, and it kind of feeds into his little plot that he's got going on of the conspiracy against him. But there is no way, I think most importantly, he's got to find $333 billion, and he doesn't have that kind of cash. His wealth is built on debt and theory and possibility and property, which is not worth what he thinks it is. So I look forward to seeing him write the cheque.
He said about the false statement about the size of his Trump Tower home, that was probably down to a simple mistake by someone forgetting to take into account elevator shafts and different things. Pointing at the judge, he declared, "You ruled against me without knowing anything about it."
Yeah, well, it's Trump. It's incredible, his ability to just construct this narrative universe for himself. Like, I'd love to see the version of his flat where 2/3 of it is elevator shafts. It'd be absolutely fascinating.
Counting the view.
It'd be an absolutely fascinating.
I
mean, it's really like the judge. You read the story in the Times, and you're reading it first, and you think actually the judge is being really, really nice to these people. There's a quote here that says, "This is a venial sin, not a mortal sin. They are accused only of inflating asset values." And you think, OK, why is the judge doing this? And then you realise it's because he's baffled that they just wouldn't admit it. Because he's like, there was so much evidence. There was reams and reams of evidence. And the Trump children were just there being like, nah, no idea. No, got nothing. And clearly this judge is just at the absolute end of his tether. Is it going to make a difference to anything else? I mean, on the one hand, as Susie says, yeah, the financial blow could be really severe. I imagine there's going to be an awful lot of emails going out to the Trump campaign subscriber base at this point. You know, comrades, I need your help. But on the other hand, he's already on trial for an insurrection, and there's every chance that he might get elected from prison. So whether or not this will derail his campaign when nothing else has remains to be seen. But given that, as you say, he was a property mogul first and foremost, if anything was going to shatter the foundational myth of Donald Trump, the great business success, this ought to be it.
I don't think even as president he'll be able to pardon himself this fine because it's a state thing, and so even as president he would still have to find $333 billion.
Attach it to a bill. Just attach it to a bill. The 350 million pound New York property bail fund attached to some bill or other.
Henry and Susie, thank you very much for the speculation as to how he might pay the fine.
Well, Putin, probably. Will's got some cash.
In the 11. Let's take a look at the weather in the meantime.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The mild but unsettled theme continues this weekend with further wet and windy spells crossing the British Isles. Most places will be dry but cloudy on Saturday morning with coastal mist and murk, hill fog and a few spots of drizzle. More persistent rain will affect western fringes of Ireland. It's set to be another mild day but with limited brighter spells, these mainly in the east. The cloud will be thick enough for some light showers ahead of a band of wetter and windier weather that will push across Ireland through the morning. Outbreaks of rain will extend erratically eastwards across the UK through the rest of Saturday, heavy and persistent at times. There's a risk of local flooding or travel disruption across England and Wales, with the rain falling on already saturated ground.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.